Hello, welcome to the A Book a Day channel. Today, the book I'm going to decipher for you is called Story Power. This book primarily discusses how to enhance your professional influence through storytelling. For instance, how should you tell stories during interviews? How should you use storytelling to secure promotions and salary increases? And so on. At first glance, you might be a bit puzzled. There are already many books that teach storytelling, so why another one? What makes this book unique? Speaking of that, let me start by telling you a story. There was a person named Peter who joined the Dragon Sect, and one day the sect leader called him over. He told Peter that he was about to embark on a dangerous mission, a life or death situation. But Peter's martial arts skills were very poor, and he would surely die when faced with an opponent. The sect leader offered to teach him a few moves, but Peter immediately declined. The reason was that practicing martial arts was too tiring, and it required years of training to achieve any level of proficiency. The sect leader shook his head and said, "No need for all that trouble. I'll teach you a set of techniques called the Invincible Three Moves. These 3 moves are quite peculiar, and no matter how skilled your opponent is, you can catch them off guard. What's more, you don't need years of practice. You can learn it in just 2 hours." Peter was thrilled to hear this and later defeated many skilled martial artists using these 3 moves. Okay, the story is over, and you might have guessed what I'm getting at. This book, Story Power, is a bit like the Invincible 3 moves that Peter learned. Some people say that storytelling depends on talent and inspiration, while others say it requires diligent practice and effort. However, after reading this book, you'll find that these debates don't matter. The most significant feature of this book is that it skips the theories and discussions, and goes straight to the point. It provides you with all the workplace stories you'll ever need, such as how to interview, negotiate promotions and salary increases, become a leader, and more. It breaks them all down and serves them to you on a silver platter. Even if you have no prior storytelling training, with just a little adjustment to the templates provided by the author, you can immediately put them to use. The author of this book is a seasoned leadership coach and leadership training program provider. She has also served as the Chief Information Officer for the Asia-Pacific region at Motorola. The book also has a co-author, Lin Hongbo, who led global teams at Accenture, a management consulting company. Both of them have extensive real-world experience. Before we dive into the book, I want to emphasize once again that this book primarily focuses on the workplace. When we talk about storytelling, it's exclusively for workplace communication, not for writing scripts. Next, I'll break down this book into 2 parts to explain it to you. In the first part, we'll discuss the most important principles of storytelling, which are the foundation you need before starting any story. In the second part, we'll delve into specific techniques and talk about the essential story templates you must master in your professional career. Part 1. First, let's talk about the most important principles of storytelling. As mentioned earlier, this is a book that gets straight to the point. To keep in line with the book style, I'd like to share a real story that happened to me, which conveniently aligns with the principles presented by the author. After the story, we'll dive deeper into the principles. Alright, let's start with the story. Not too long ago, I received a call from a friend who works in investment and financial products. He had organized a crucial product presentation that day. However, he got stuck in a terrible traffic jam on his way to the event. To make matters worse, there were no available shared bicycles around, and it took him a while to find one. Now, he finally arrived at the venue, but he was delayed, and the security stopped him. He had to call a colleague to come out and meet him during this waiting period. In the meantime, he called me to ask how he should apologize upon arriving to minimize the damage. At the time, I suggested the following. First, don't apologize. Apologizing is just going through the motions, and people will accept it, but that's about it. It won't add any value to your presentation. He found it strange because he had already been late, and not getting penalized would be a good outcome, so how could it add value? The solution is actually simple. He just needed to turn this incident into a story. I told him, look, your goal today is to introduce financial products. So why do people buy financial products? Many are concerned about the depreciation of their assets. In other words, everyone is afraid of the unexpected. Luckily, you can reframe your recent experience as a perfect example of this. What you need to do now is take a couple of photos, one with the shared bike and another a selfie when your colleague comes to pick you up. Then, quickly incorporate these 2 photos into your presentation. He adopted this advice, and his opening went something like this. Ladies and gentlemen, life is full of surprises. I've always been skeptical of that saying, but in the last 2 hours I've become a firm believer. I left 2 hours early, which should have been more than enough time. However, I encountered a traffic accident on the way, causing a delay. I finally found a shared bicycle and rode to the venue, only to be stopped by security due to my lateness. To commemorate these unexpected moments, I even took 2 photos, which you can see here. Now I fully understand that life is full of surprises. The world is so uncertain, so what should we do? We need to plan our finances wisely. Later, my friend told me that this was the most applauded and laughed at presentation he had ever delivered. So, the story was effective. But if you think about it, this opening was quite unconventional. First, it didn't provide any useful information related to the main topic of the presentation, which was financial products. Second, the entire presentation was only half an hour, and this opening took up about 6 to 7 minutes. This left very little time to cover the in-depth financial knowledge he had prepared. However, the interesting part is that this presentation turned out to be successful. So, why was this story effective? This leads us to the basic principles of storytelling, as presented by the author. There are several principles, but I've selected 2 of the most important ones. The first principle is that what you talk about should either relate to the audience, or make them like it. It has to be one of the 2, because most of the time, you're dealing with an audience that's easily distracted. For instance, think about what you're doing right now. You might be driving, working out, or commuting to and from work, right? Regardless of what you're doing, there are probably other things around you that can grab your attention. Even more important is your current state and the state of those who usually listen to you. Unless you're a teacher giving a lecture, people tend to be in an instinctual state most of the time. In this state, people are like watching TV at home, eating snacks on the couch, changing channels with half-hearted attention. They only fully engage when they come across something that genuinely interests them. So, how do you grab their attention in this state? As mentioned earlier, your words must either relate to them or make them like it. For example, in the case of the late arrival story, what made it interesting was that it was fun and likable to the audience. Another example, I know a senior insurance broker who sent text messages to a business founder every day for a year. His goal was to sell insurance. And the most surprising thing is that not only did the business owner not block him, but they eventually met for coffee and signed a significant insurance policy. How did he achieve this? His text messages never mentioned insurance. The messages consisted of 2 things. I'm following your activities and your recent forum posts have inspired me, and I want to update you on my progress. I read a book recently, and I've made some improvements I'd like to discuss with you now. Isn't this a perfect example of talking about something that relates to the other person and makes them like it? You might say, what if I'm always focused on engaging the other person and making them like me? What about the important topic I wanted to discuss? What if I can't cover it all? This brings us to the second principle. Your goal is to make the other person understand, not necessarily listen to everything you say. These are 2 distinct concepts. Making them understand doesn't necessarily mean you need to cover everything, and listening to everything doesn't necessarily guarantee understanding. Let's take the late arrival story as an example. You wanted to convey the message that life is full of surprises. You certainly didn't need to provide statistical accident rates for every year. You just needed to tell this one story, and the audience would understand. This principle is easier said than done. It sounds simple, but when we actually speak, we often have a fear. We're afraid that if we don't say everything, we might miss something. In reality, you don't need to. This process is somewhat like going to war. Your goal isn't how many bullets you fired. It's about how many enemies you've hit. It doesn't matter if you've said everything. What matters is whether they've understood. So, how can you make the other person understand quickly? You can turn the message you want to convey into a specific question. For example, if you want to talk about the unique features of Beijing, that's a broad topic, and you might wonder where to start. However, if you turn it into a question, such as how should you spend a day in Beijing, it becomes easier to answer. After mentioning the Forbidden City, the Bird's Nest, and Sanlitun, your audience will have a basic understanding of Beijing. So, this concludes the first part. The fundamental principles of telling a story boil down to one idea. You need to engage the audience's imagination. First, remember that your audience is lazier than you might imagine. What you talk about must either relate to them or make them like it, otherwise, they won't be interested. Second, your audience is smarter than you might think. You don't need to say everything, but you do need to be clear. To achieve clarity, you can transform a broad topic into a specific question. Part 2. The previous content covers the basic principles of storytelling. In the second part, we'll delve into specific scenarios and discuss some of the most commonly used workplace storytelling templates. Before we proceed, we need to understand what trust is composed of because all stories aim to gain others' trust. In this book, the author provides a trust evaluation formula commonly used at McKinsey. This formula forms the basis for all the stories presented later. The trust formula is as follows. Trust equals capability x, reliability x, intimacy, self-orientation. This formula is quite straightforward to understand. Capability, reliability, and intimacy are in the numerator, and the larger these values, the better. Self-orientation is in the denominator, and the smaller this value, the better. Capability refers to your qualifications and experience, which are hard facts that cannot be changed. These are usually listed on your resume, and there's no need to dwell on them. The crucial areas to focus on during an interview are reliability and intimacy. How can you demonstrate reliability? Simply showcase how you've solved a specific problem from start to finish. Intimacy, on the other hand, is about coming across as sincere. For instance, are you willing to reveal your weaknesses? These aspects add to your trustworthiness. Self-orientation, present in the denominator of the formula, needs to be minimized. Self-orientation refers to whether you are self-centered, always attributing outcomes to yourself. These are the general principles. Regarding how to apply these principles, the author provides several storytelling templates for different scenarios. The first template is about how to introduce your strengths during a job interview. The author presents the STAR model, which stands for situation, task, action, and result. The core of this model is quite simple: challenge plus solution. In other words, you need to present a closed loop in your interview, showing how you solved a specific problem. The reliability component of the McKinsey Trust formula is evaluated based on your ability to solve specific problems, not just listing your career history. For instance, consider a police officer who works as a supervising officer responsible for overseeing suspects in temporary custody. The officer's greatest strength is exceptional alertness, or a form of intelligence that doesn't necessarily come with degrees or certificates. How can this officer effectively convey this strength? It's not like they can attach an IQ test score to their resume. The officer's self-introduction involved a true story from their past. One night, there was a sudden brawl among 5 inmates under their watch. The officer was ready to intervene, but something felt off. He couldn't put his finger on what was wrong, so he pretended to open the cell door, but stopped short. After 2 more attempts, he realized the issue. First, it was late at night, and during a brawl, inmates usually aren't dressed properly. They don't have shoes on and are disheveled. However, on this occasion, all 5 inmates were neatly dressed. Second, during a fight, people are usually highly emotional and unlikely to stop fighting easily. But at the moment when he pretended to open the door, all 5 inmates immediately halted their fight and focused on him. Later, a search revealed a toothbrush sharpened to a knife-like edge on one of the suspects. If the officer had entered, the consequences could have been disastrous. This story was more thrilling than a movie. The interesting thing is that the officer never intended to make people think he was highly intelligent. However, after telling the story, people couldn't help but see him as sharp and composed. If you want to highlight your strengths in a self-introduction, you should think about the most challenging problem you've solved and use that specific challenge to illustrate your strengths. This is far more effective than listing your resume. For example, if you're an insurance broker, instead of talking about your performance metrics, share a story about the most difficult policy you handled. If you work in HR, instead of describing your daily tasks, talk about a specific human resources project you managed. However, merely highlighting your strengths may not be enough. During interviews, you are often asked about your weaknesses. This is an opportunity to increase intimacy. Remember the McKinsey Trust formula? Revealing your weaknesses is a way to build intimacy. However, you should be cautious about the degree of self-disclosure. If your weakness is too significant, such as lacking self-discipline, the interviewer might question your suitability for the job. If it's too minor, like being a bad cook, it may give the impression that you're not serious. The author's advice is to reveal a controlled, ambiguous, minor weakness. This isn't very complicated. For example, if you are a manager, you can say your weakness is having too many ideas. Sometimes, this can make subordinates feel uncertain, not knowing if your words are instructions or just ideas. To address this, you've decided to clarify whether you're giving instructions or sharing ideas before communicating with subordinates. You see, the excessive number of ideas can be interpreted as both an advantage and a disadvantage, and it's something you can improve. This is a typical example of a controlled, ambiguous, minor weakness. Now, let's talk about changing jobs or careers. These changes generally result from either dissatisfaction with the current job or a better opportunity elsewhere. However, these 2 reasons can't be directly stated. The author suggests transforming external incentives into internal motivations. For example, consider a programmer who is also a mother. She was laid off from her previous job, and she started a children's coding training class to make ends meet. Whether it's due to job loss or financial necessity, these are external motivations. In reality, Parents may not want to enroll their children in such a class. To address this, you need to convert external incentives into internal motivations. She can say something like this: after leaving my previous company, I went through one of the most challenging periods of my life. I could have found another job and continued as a programmer. However, during this time, I spent every day with my child. While teaching him, I realized that there's nothing more fulfilling than educating a child. This is the career I truly want. So I decided not to continue as a programmer but to pursue this career. By converting external incentives into internal motivations, this story becomes more engaging. You're not merely narrating your experiences, you're presenting your choices. And choices are the best way to reflect values. It's like saying, I have strong family values, which doesn't convey much. But if you say, I once turned down $1 million job because it required frequent business trips, and I wanted to spend more time with my family, your values become vivid. So when changing jobs or careers, use a storytelling template that transforms external incentives into internal motivations, and then showcases your choice during crucial moments. After discussing job change, let's proceed to the next scenario. How to negotiate a promotion or raise. This is a common challenge for many. Being too direct might seem like you're fishing for compliments, but not addressing your accomplishments is unsatisfactory. In this book, the author suggests the technique of laying out 2 layers of goals, meaning that when you report your work to your superiors, you should present 2 objectives. The first objective is the established goal, which represents how well you performed your job. For instance, if you're an HR professional organizing a campus recruitment event, you'll naturally mention that the recruitment was highly successful and you filled all the desired positions. However, this isn't enough. You need to make your superiors see your effort, but it's not easy to express this directly. This is where the second objective, the future goal, comes into play. This means that you present suggestions for the future even if you don't intend to provide actual suggestions. Through these suggestions, you can highlight your efforts. For example, regarding campus recruitment, you can say, although this round was successful, we suggest adding some more resources next time. During this event, our team put in extra hours and effort to handle unexpected issues. To prevent these situations in the future, here are a few suggestions. You see, on the surface, you're presenting suggestions, but you're, in fact, conveying that you worked exceptionally hard and deserve recognition. If you want to ensure that your efforts are noticed, this method is worth trying. Now, speaking of how to communicate with subordinates, many people think that the higher you are in the hierarchy, the more you need to showcase your strengths to gain respect. However, Robert Mickey, known as the godfather of Hollywood screenwriting, believes the opposite. He says people submit to power, seek shelter in power, but will never resonate with power. In other words, the greater your power, the less likely you can create a connection. What can you do? Aristotle provided an answer long ago. Think as a wise person but communicate in the language of the people. This is a principle followed by many business leaders today. They share stories of their failures, challenges, and struggles. This makes sense because, in reality, nobody is perfect. To build a connection, you need to drop your facade. To summarize, in the second part, we've discussed storytelling templates for self-introduction, changing jobs, seeking promotions, and improving communication with subordinates. At the core of each story is the McKinsey Trust formula: trust equals capability x, reliability x, intimacy, self-orientation. You'll notice that every story enhances the calculation of this formula. For instance, in self-introductions, you emphasize specific challenges instead of your resume, which increases reliability. Disclosing weaknesses increases intimacy. When seeking a promotion or a raise, you suggest improvements to lower your self-orientation, because you're making suggestions, not merely highlighting your efforts. Here, the essence of story power has been interpreted for you. Finally, I have a personal insight to share, which can also serve as a reminder. You've probably noticed that there are numerous books teaching storytelling nowadays. Almost everyone realizes that storytelling is more effective than simply presenting facts and reasoning. We've all focused on how to persuade others through storytelling, and I'm no exception. I used to be deeply absorbed in this matter, and I still am. However, this year, I had a profound reflection. When I think about myself, I've always been trying to figure out how to persuade others, but it seems that I'm rarely truly convinced by others. Yet, if you observe people who have achieved great things, you'll find that they might not be experts in persuasion, but there are definitely individuals who can change their cognitive models and are open to being persuaded. You see, when you persuade someone, you're merely pushing your own boundaries and viewpoints a little further. But if you lose the ability to be persuaded, you might be missing out on the whole world. As F. Scott Fitzgerald once said, the ability to hold two opposing ideas at the same time and still function is a mark of a first-rate intelligence. But where do these opposing ideas come from? Clearly, they come from others from being persuaded. Therefore, from this perspective, the skill of persuasion is important. Yet, to possess the ability to be persuaded while mastering this skill is what's truly remarkable. Tips: if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to share it with your friends. Congratulations, you've completed another book. See you next time.